All right, welcome everyone. You all survived the eclipse. Awesome. Okay, so let's call this Park Rec and Greenways Board meeting on Tuesday, April 9th, 2024 at 9:03 a.m. to order. We do not have any, live stream is down, unfortunately, and no remote participation.
But we are recording.
We are recording. It'll post later. Yep. All right, so first thing is, does anybody have any changes to the current agenda that is before you? No? All right, do I hear a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Any second? All in favor?
Aye.
Fabulous. All right, and then with the minutes, does anybody have a change to the minutes from the previous PR&G board meeting or the joint council meeting? No changes? All right, do I have a motion to adopt the minutes as presented?
So moved.
Second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
It was the second?
Both,
Okay, I'll pick one.
So- yeah.
There's a tie in.
Okay. All right, moving on. We have some people in the audience. Do we have public commenters? All right, so, yeah, we'll get you a microphone so you don't have to shout.
Sir.
All right, so as stated in the rules of public commentary in the agenda, you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Before you start, please give us your name and your address.
Great. My name's Tori Komisky. I am a homeowner at 312 Painted Turtle Court. As you know, that's one of the most impacted properties with the Marvin Creek Preserve Connector Trail. I understand I only have 3 minutes. It's not nearly enough, so please, I'm open to answering questions if anybody has any follow-up questions for me. I got to take a peek at the agenda prior to the meeting, and I appreciate the attempt at kind of putting together a timeline on the connector trail, as it does go back further than just the last few months. It's been an item of conversation in public meetings since August of 2022, as reported in the agenda. I think I'd like to share some color with that as far as what the other side of the conversation was with Marvin Creek at that time, because that doesn't get reported in public meeting with the village. So in August of 2022, your former facilities manager, Derek Durst, reported back that he had attended a Marvin Creek HOA meeting in August of 2022. I was in attendance of that meeting. There was not widespread support for the connector trail as he presented on this side with public session. I know he's no longer an employee here with the village, but it matters. And I know a lot of strange things can happen sometimes when there's transition and former employees that aren't with us anymore. But unfortunately, you know, the clear opposition at that time wasn't shared back with the PRG board or the village council. I know this matters to you all, the feedback from the community, and this is why I'm coming to share this. In addition, he then reports back several times, I believe in October of that year, and then February and May of 2023, intent to reach out to concerned homeowners. Never happened. It does get reported back, however, that, oh, I moved the trail, 20 or 30 feet and walked with them on Friday, and now they love it. Those things never happened. My understanding is that Mr. Durst only ever interacted with either our HOA board or the HOA president himself. The concerned citizens who had given opposition were not reached out to directly. That's probably one of the main things. Again, I can give more information there, as I know I only have a couple minutes. As far as the timeline starting in January, we found out in late December that the easement had been given to the village of Marvin. It was not ever shared with Marvin Creek residents by our HOA board. We were not notified. We were not given a chance to participate in that conversation. So on January 2nd, I had seen out on the trail some FEMA flood zone flyers. And then on January 3rd, it appears, I believe a member of the board here had sent to Mr. Nestor. I see in this in this file here, there's some crumpled up versions of the flyers that were put out on the trail to notify the trail builder, I guess, that this was a flood zone, and there's information there even noting to which statutes, and there's QR codes and all of that. So it seems that our planner knew as early as January the 3rd that they were out of compliance with FEMA regulations. So they didn't stop work within 2 days of that. I was here in the Village Hall on January the 8th before the extreme rain event, making sure that staff members were definitely aware of the FEMA regulations that were required. At that point, Mr. Nestor continued to maintain that he did not need that FEMA compliance. Heading into February, I think everybody's probably pretty up to speed. I'm probably close to the end of my 3 minutes. So just wanted to let you know, I'm here for questions. We've been very involved with this process from the beginning. We've trusted that staff was returning information to you all as objections came up, as new news came up, as anything came up. As far back as Mr. Durst being on staff, it seems that wasn't happening. And not only was it not happening, but also misinformation was being given to you all about the support of residents for this trail. It has been opposed since August of 2022 by residents. It continues to be opposed. My hope is that you all will give a firm recommendation to our council tonight to please ask them to return the easement as our HOA board has requested, based on many, many factors that have led up to this very strange confluence of events. So that is my ask. And please, if there's any questions, I am so willing to talk about this. It's hard because with public comments, I only get 3 minutes, and then there's a lot of conversation, hours and hours of conversation that gets to happen without it being a back and forth. I just wanted to let you all know I appreciate what you do, and I'm really hoping that you give a strong recommendation to our council this evening to return the easement to our homeowners. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments, or just here to observe? Okay, awesome. Thank you, Tori, for your background and input on the situation. Much appreciated. All right. Before we get into back into that, let's move on to the Parks and Rec update. So Tyler, that's you.
All right. So coming up, Marvin Day, April 27th, a lot of fun, 4 p.m. I think pretty much everybody's given me their yes or no of attendance. Appreciate all the help everyone's given. So that'll be April 27th, beginning at 4 p.m. If you're looking to attend, we will have very limited parking on site, but we will have a shuttle running from Marvin Ridge High School. So plan to use that. We have a great band called the Breakfast Club. We'll be there playing, some really good food trucks, and a huge kids fun zone. So it's going to be a fun evening. And we will cap the night with a great fireworks show. On June 1st,
What time do the buses actually run? What's the window?
so they're going to run every 15 minutes. They'll begin right before 4 o'clock, probably about 3:45. And then you can kind of expect it about every 15 minutes. One will be at the park, one will be at the school. On June 1st, we're going to have a 5K. You can start looking for that online here soon. We just finished up the link to that for the sign up. It'll be a health fair as well. We'll have the blood drive truck out there. We have a couple vendors, DJ, stuff like that. So that'll be at 9 a.m. for the 5K, and the family fun run will be at 10. So that'll be a good little morning, a lot to do out there. Following that, on July 12th, we have a stargazing event, and that'll be held at 7:30, and that registration will come up in the coming weeks. It'll go online. That is limited space. We will have about 30 spots for that. We have a local volunteer from NASA who's very knowledgeable, and he'll have really cool telescopes and stuff like that out. And he'll do a lot of talking, and it's going to be a great experience to learn for people in the community. That will be something you have to pay for on the registration. It'll be $35 for residents and about $125 for non-residents. Following that, lastly, on September 21st, setting that as a date, we're going to schedule a cornhole tournament out of the park. Cornhole, yes, sir. Filling out the details on that, but the date right now will be September 21st. Probably about $40 a team. That'll be a registration. No cap to it. As many people want to come can come. So yeah,
Stargazing event, do you need any support, any help?
I don't think so. I think this man, will bring in any help he needs. And I know like staff, like myself and Davey will be there to work it, to help him set up and break down and stuff. So I think it's all good. And if you want to come, I think it's going to be cool.
Oh, it will be cool. No,
If
it will be cool.
anybody wants to show up,
But if you need help, I'm happy to help.
awesome.
Well,
And
I
we,
say that not knowing if I'm,
and we've said
I should look at my calendar.
we set the whole weekend. It's July 12th is a Friday and we're using the Saturday and Sunday as rain dates or cloud dates, in case.
Okay, yeah, because you've got to worry about clouds.
Got to be perfect. So yeah, we have that whole weekend set aside for that.
That's a good idea, Easter egg.
So, yeah. Any questions on like Marvin Day or anything coming up? Mm-hmm.
On NASA, $35 resident. Right. How much was it non-resident?
It'd be about 125 for non.
How is that number?
Just recommended, really trying to benefit our local residents inside of Marvin. Try to give them first dibs and the best deal at what we can do.
Well, especially since it's a small number of people that can go.
It's gonna be time, yeah, it's small.
So basically, it's residents.
Could be
I
non-rent.
mean, let's be honest,
Well,
so it's the residents.
giving a benefit to them.
And what's the total number again?
We're gonna let about 30 people in. Anywhere children from 5 and up can attend. Anybody under 13 will have to be accompanied by a parent. Per person, but that'll be for the child. Like the parent just kind of has to be with them. So 30, like sign your kid up for 35, but you have to be with them.
Okay. Any other questions on that stuff? All right, let's get into the unfinished business, which I'm up quite a bit here. Okay,
Is he supposed to do this?
oh, that's right.
I'm not
I'm
sure
so
what that
used to
means.
that being
Mhm.
incorporated in this. So, yeah, sorry, I jumped over. Do you have any updates on the trails and greenways?
Nothing fresh coming up right this second, nothing new at the moment other than what's about to be discussed.
Right.
But moving forward right now, we don't have anything,
Nothing on the agenda?
nothing coming up right
Yeah.
now, right this second.
Okay. That was sort of what I anticipated, so apologize for jumping over that. All right, so before I get into the presentation that was attached to the agenda, I just wanted to state that the purpose of this presentation is to examine this Marvin Creek Connector Trail issue as a case study to inform the board's decision-making process going forward. And also because if we would like, we have not been requested other than by public, but we have not been requested by council to make a recommendation. But if we come to a consensus and do want to make a recommendation to council with regard to how to proceed with this connector trail, we are able to do that. But before we do that, I want to make sure that everybody is operating off of a similar set of facts and figures. And unless you have undertaken going through an exhaustive study of all of the minutes and videos of previous meetings, you probably at this point only have the information that has been brought up public comment and a few sort of out of context comments during the joint meeting, which I didn't feel was a good enough basis for people to draw conclusions. We'll be going over a sort of blow by blow of what happened with the trail. And then I also want to address at least a little bit about the FEMA compliance issue, because I feel like there is sort of an underlying misconception about how that operates. And I'm not here to sell anybody a perspective on that. I just want to make sure that I'm sensing a misconception. I want to clear it up. And then if everyone's opinion stays the same after getting that information, then great. I also want to just take a brief moment to acknowledge, this is not the forum to air any personal grievances, but I do want to acknowledge that for the benefit of this board, that the last meeting with, joint meeting with council, was surprisingly combative. And, I think that it was unnecessarily so. I think that the concerns of this board to inquire about what we knew and when is totally a valid concern. And that that was met with, also our concern that, that we've heard some allegations that this trail was approved incorrectly, wasn't permitted, and that there have also been some allegations that that was done in bad faith. These are obviously very, very important concerns. One of council members' points was very accurate, if rather dismissive, and that is that this board is advisory only in nature, and that we have no role actually in the execution of our recommendations. Those things go to council for budget approval and directive, and then is executed by staff. So even though that gives us all a defense, I think that misses the point that the role of this board isn't necessarily understood outside of this chamber, and that we all want to present, a level of competence and confidence in our role, which, if we don't have that kind of information, it subjects us to the same kind of public scrutiny that the decision makers are subjected to, whether we're responsible or not. And I think to be caught out at the grocery store when you can't be expected to have facts and figures at hand is one thing, but to be caught out unawares at a public meeting for the role of this board is kind of another issue. And so to suggest that that's something that we shouldn't be concerned about is somewhat disingenuous. But I do think that we are living in a very different world here since the GO bond was first promoted. I can tell you that for the year plus I served on this board, until I became chair, we hadn't had a single public comment. Nobody paid attention. Nobody was listening to our meetings. And, now we have a lot of public interest, which we welcome, because that is our role here, is to do our best for what we think is the overall desire and benefit of the community. And so without that input, we have to sort of make it up. However, I think we're also all aware that we are living in a current environment where thoughtful concerns suddenly escalate into sort of more dramatic ones that may be out of proportion with the issues. I'm not saying that happens here, but what I'm saying is that there is often an air of negativity, which is emotionally draining to all of us if we have to encounter it. And that's one of the reasons that I think this is an important issue, is that we shouldn't necessarily have to be subjected to, that negative stuff. And unfortunately, let's face it, the people who think if we're doing a good job, the people who think we're doing a good job are far less likely to shout it as loudly as the people who think you're doing a bad job. And so I want to also point out that I think what has happened is that we're all human and don't want to have to experience that, especially if we're not at fault. But I also think that, council has experienced a lot of that. With the constant contention leading up to the election, they were subject to kind of an online beating, and nobody here is a career politician that might be somewhat immune to that. We are all human and respond to that, and it drags us down. So if there is any, reason or excuse for, sort of the energy that was behind the joint meeting. I think that has a lot to do with it. Not only have we as a group sort of received allegations of sort of improper conduct, but then our questioning of council sort of pushed that back to them. And unfortunately, I think that resulted in an emotional response. And that is exceptionally unfortunate because we are all on the same team. And that is my main point right now with all of these words, is that there is no one in this council, the boards, that I feel is here as an aggrandizing platform to impose their will on the people. And staff in particular, if you don't know that these are competent, dedicated individuals with the highest integrity who are trying to do the right thing, although human, then you need to spend more time with them because they really are. So I can understand a lot of the emotions here. The only one that I cannot support and find unacceptable are accusations of deliberate malfeasance on the part of staff, council, board, anyone. We are all trying to do what's right. We all have different perspectives on what that is, and we should, and we all have different communication styles. But I would like to keep us focused that everyone here is really on the same team, trying to do what's right for the community. All right, so having given my little lecture, can I screenplay?
You can now.
I don't even know how that, where is my screenplay? Oh, there it is.
Got it.
I think so.
And I'd just like to add, Jen,
Which guy am I?
It's the top one.
Ruby.
And you'll enter the 77026.
Did that? No. Keyboard.
Oh, hang on. Yep. You got it. So,
All right, cool.
Yep.
I just wanted to add, Jen, I think that was very well stated.
Thank you.
And from a council perspective, you and I have discussed some of the ways that as we kind of transition, I'm just having moved over a few months ago.
Yeah,
But I think we've had some good conversations as well.
I
In
agree.
terms of helping to develop a better communication kind of both ways. So.
I agree. And when we get to the end of this presentation, that will
Yeah.
be the next topic is for everyone, we've all kind of gone home, maybe thought about it. And, I'd love to hear everyone's opinion to see after, we get through all of the information that, see what people think the next, the way to go forward is, which is really the whole purpose here.
I'm going to add a small point.
Yeah.
People do listen to the recordings or the live stream sometimes because I get calls about it. So,
Before the geo bond or
oh, yeah,
after?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
Or-
good.
Yeah. Not many probably, but
A few.
A few.
Okay.
Yeah. Pretty consistently. Yeah, so-
Additionally, if anyone here ever gets a call and you don't know the answer to something, please call staff. That's what we're here
Oh,
for.
yeah, I would do that.
Christina's pretty good about it. She
Yeah, I
she usually lets me
absolutely
know.
will.
Okay, so we're going to start with a timeline of events. All right, so the large map on the bottom right is very familiar to all of us. This was a map generated by an outside agency that was hired by the village to identify trails that we could pursue as budget and availability and development made it feasible. This was not developed by PR&G specifically. It is just a suggestive map that we operate off of when making recommendations. The blown up inset on the top is the Marvin Creek Trail Connector's sort of location in space. It is the dotted line marked the overall trail C4, which is marked with the dotted line is, in fact, oops, I think I can do this. Does that show up? Oh, look at that. We love Apple. Okay, so the C4 area in solid is a concrete trail that is part of the Marvin Creek HOA property, owned, operated, maintained by them, not by the village. However, the connector trail that is in question here is the little bit, I think we have 3 dots here that would connect that concrete pathway to C7. which goes or skirts around the edge of the preserve, and connects to the preserve trail that has already been completed. At the time of this map, it was programmed. It is now in place. So one of the interesting things is that I understand is that while C4 is a large trail, may have been in the capital improvement plan, which is where, you know, the bids and everything for all of these individual trails get entered. While the main trail may have been, obviously the little itty bitty bit of connector between the Marvin Creek concrete trail and C7 was not included in the capital improvement plan. So there was no line item or cost estimate for it. According to official records, although it may have brewed in verbal conversations before that, but in written records, the first, this was first proposed, hold on, sorry. This was first proposed to council by facilities manager Derek Durst in August of 2022. He reached out to the Marvin Creek HOA to assess their interest and obtain a cost estimate of $18,000. Then over the course of the next several months, he, I assume, presented to the Marvin Creek HOA, and as public comment indicated, you know, at least one impacted homeowner objected to the proposed route. Obviously, none of us were there, and there are no minutes of that meeting for us to examine, or several meetings perhaps. So it's hard to know exactly who, but we know at least one. However, the overall reports back to council, not even to this board, was that the Marvin Creek HOA and council were both in favor of pursuing the idea further at that time. So over the course of the end of 2022 and into the beginning of 2023, Derek continued to pitch the idea to the Marvin Creek HOA and presumably attempt to bring the concerned homeowners on board. In February of 2023, at a meeting, I believe, of the Marvin Creek HOA, at least one homeowner requested that a flood impact study be performed before they gave it, at least that homeowner gave it the blessing. And when that information was brought to council, council declined to engage the flood study for the simple reason that it did not seem prudent to spend that kind of money before there was a commitment to the easement. Because if we did the study and then they pulled out, we would have spent that money for nothing. So from a purely financial standpoint, this was put back to the Marvin Creek HOA to see if they still wanted to proceed. And ultimately, the HOA board did. In May 2023 is the first recorded mention of this development or this trail with PR&G at our May 2023 meeting. Derek included this connector trail in an update and indicated that he had met with concerned homeowners to redirect the path to their satisfaction, and we were waiting for the HOA to sign off. Now, I don't know who he met with. That was not a matter of record. However, there was an adjustment to the path, which requires, at this point, reflagging. So I know that it did get readjusted. And then, of course, right at about the same time, that was Derek's last meeting. He resigned in May and left in May of 2023. Which then threw us into, at least as far as trails go, into a bit of an upheaval because Derek's primary job straddled both facilities and programming. And so the entirety of trails and programming kind of fell within his purview. However, after his leaving, it was determined that we would then have two staff positions splitting those duties. One is Davey and the other is Tyler, who is responsible for programming. Davey's for the facilities. And I think what got lost in the middle of that is who was doing the trails. And I think Tyler absorbed a bit of that on Hunter's behalf, because Hunter's job is not necessarily to oversee the greenways and the trails, except as it pertains to the actual business of zoning. Which is his job. And so I think that In that transition, the handling of these trails went through too many people with not a very clear delineation of the organization. All right, so moving on to July of 2023, the members of council and staff attended a Marvin Creek HOA meeting. At this time, Mrs. Thomas, who was the presenter, public comment at our last regular board meeting, raised concerns about the FEMA compliance and was assured that those issues would be met. It is her allegation that I believe it is her allegation that her comment was actually ignored. However, it does seem that Planner Nelson did follow up with research on the issue, including phone calls with the appropriate National Flood Insurance Program liaisons, and determined that the trail on the Marvin Creek HOA easement, proposed easement in question, was permissible per Marvin ordinance and permissible per FEMA. What is important to distinguish here, and we'll look at a map in a minute, is that there are two parcels of property that are affected by this connector trail. One of them is on the Marvin Creek HOA's property. Oh, what? My apologies. My autocorrect or something in my brain. It is not Planner Nelson, it is Planner Nestor. Sorry. My apologies for that. So, in any event, the Marvin Creek HOA property is just a crushed concrete path. It then crosses into the preserves common space. And at that point, the trail has to cross Marvin Branch Creek with the use of a footbridge. The bridge issue is entirely on the preserve. All of the Marvin Creek connector trail is on the crushed concrete. There is a small footpath over a small part of the creek. However, that is not in the floodplain or the floodway per the maps. So one of the things that I would like to point out, having looked at the ordinances locally, is that generally encroachments are prohibited in floodplains without a variance. A variance can be granted, but there are some exceptions that do not require a variance. They do require a permit, but they do not require a variance. And among those exceptions are the development is for greenway trails, boardwalks, pedestrian crossings, so on and so forth. So according to our own ordinances, there is at least a foundation for Hunter's determination that this would be permissible. The issue here is that the permit was not created and recorded in the appropriate fashion. All right, so in September 23, and I did it through the whole thing, Hunter, so in September of 2023, Hunter was waiting on a quote from the trail builder for the relocation of the path and the footbridge. This was in response to those trail direction changes. And they were also waiting for the Marvin Creek HOA to vote on the project. So in October of 2023, Hunter and Tyler mentioned this trail in a PR&G board meeting. And indicated that the trail builder had been approved by council. At this time, that was when we approved the trail. There was a meeting at which, and I haven't been able to find a time, the actual meeting and the timestamp for it. There was a meeting at which, when Tyler first came on, he indicated that this trail had already been built. But obviously that was in error as he was just coming on and being given information. So in October, it still had not been built. The trail builder's contract had only just been approved. So then moving on to December of 2023 is a PR&G board meeting where it was reported that the final walkthrough with the trail builder and the HOA president had been done to finalize the route, and construction was set to begin in January. On January 2nd at our PR&G meeting, the trail builder, it was reported that the trail builder moved the equipment to the trail and was ready to begin. So on January 3rd, the shown flyers had been stapled to a number of trees along the affected connector trail. And I assume at the same time that complaints were received at Village Hall regarding the safety and security of the trail. I know at least from the flyers on that date that that concerns were being made known. And like I said, I also assume that they were directed here. So the flyers raised various issues, including FEMA compliance and water quality control and Endangered Species Act. The work, as reported to me, it was stopped within 2 days. It was at least stopped, as I am one of the impacted properties, I can verify that it was stopped very quickly within at least that week. And FEMA and the Department of Environmental Quality compliance issues were revisited by staff in response to the complaints and the flyers. On January 9th, we had a significant rain event that caused flooding along the Marvin Branch Creek. And I note that simply because we'll look at the issue there with regard to how that relates to flooding concerns and FEMA permitting. So at this time, the staff determined that the small portion of the path, as it had originally been laid out, had not been in the floodway. There is a difference between a floodplain and a floodway. The floodway is a narrower portion, and that a small portion of the rerouted path was now in the floodway. The footbridge on the preserved portion of the trail would need a no-rise certificate from an engineer in order to comply with FEMA requirements. And what a no-rise certificate is it is an engineer stating that the building of this item will not cause flood stage to rise, that it will not affect the base flood elevation. And there was also verbal communication with the Department of Environmental Quality, which is related to water resources and the environmental or the endangered species. The communication with that liaison indicated that no DEQ permit was necessary in order to protect the heel splitter, which is a freshwater mussel, which is the endangered species in question here, due to the minimal impact of both the trail and the bridge. So after a conversation in January with the DEQ liaison, it was determined that at least with regard to water quality and the heel splitter, the bridge did not need permitting because it was it would have an incidental impact and was minimal. So they also looked into the wetland boundaries, as that was also an issue that was raised, and the trail is not within the published wetland boundary. However, that is something that is being looked into additionally out of an abundance of caution. Even though it's not shown on the map, we're checking to make sure that there isn't a change to the map that needs to be made. All right, February 2024, in the PR&G board meeting, Tyler informed PR&G that Marvin Creek connector work had stopped. And the communication issues sort of pop up here is because he did not say why. And this would have been, of course, the perfect opportunity for us to have known why the work had been stopped. It was just indicated that it stopped. In February 2024, in the council meetings and work sessions, additional objections were raised to the Marvin Creek Connector Trail on the basis of crime and security concerns. Partly, I suppose, in response to some criminal activity in the preserve. I don't know. I don't think it was a burglary. I think it was a theft. And in the following meeting, the work session, these concerns were addressed by the sheriff's office. And just to summarize, their point is that for the preserve incident, there could be no determination as to how that person got into the neighborhood for that particular incident, but that statistically, crimes, criminal elements typically enter through roads, not trails. So I'm not a sheriff. That was their statistics. So council also submitted the petition asking that the Marvin Creek Trail easement be returned to the Marvin Creek HOA and declined to do so at that time. And in March of 2024, at our board meeting, Mrs. Thomas came and presented her concerns with the trail and distributed a small number of packets that included a map, quoted some of the same statutes that were included on those flyers, and included an excerpt of the petition and a photo from the flooding event. All right, so that brings us largely up to speed with where we are now with the connector trail. At the end, I'll talk about where we're like, where I know we're at right now. So in response to all of this, the mitigating actions that have been taken since then, since all of this came up, is that the area where the work was done, which was to scrape probably 4 inches of vegetation and topsoil off of the trail path, was reseeded twice to prevent any erosion happening from that clearing. To my knowledge and belief, no trees were removed in the work on the trail that was completed. The village manager has reached out to, or had reached out to the Marvin Creek HOA to find out whether the compliance issues would alter their approval of the trail if they had been known in advance. Obviously, you know, the board member that she initially reached out to couldn't speak on behalf of the board, but on January 16th, apparently the Marvin Creek HOA board had convened and confirmed after a board meeting that their commitment to the project had not changed. They request, the village has requested a village-wide audit of the National Flood Insurance Program to evaluate compliance village-wide with FEMA regulations. I hope everybody's ready to be caught out on that. Have requested wetlands opinion, even though the trail area is not shown within the wetlands boundary on the map. So even though it does not show that it is, they are requesting a wetland study to be sure that there have been no changes to the wetlands since that map was drawn. And they have also solicited bids for the no-rise engineering certificate. Altogether, the initial work is in the neighborhood of about $33,000. So let's get
Does
to,
does that include the initial 18,000 or is that?
that is
additional
just for the
For the
work to-
engineering and stuff
the-
like that?
Yeah, the work that needs to be done is to resurvey because of the change in trail direction, which is why I know there was at least an adjustment because there was a survey and now there needs to be a new one. There's an adjustment of the easement location. And there is the bid for the no-rise certificate from an engineer. And there is a bid from, so there's, these are available in the, where did I put it? This is available for the in the minutes of, or in the agenda report for Village Council's meeting on Thursday, February 29th. They're requesting a topographic boundary survey, a wetland delineation and report, a flood study model and report, and coordinating agency site visits. These things, there is also a breakdown in those minutes of all of the costs, and the grand total is approximately $33,000.
Does that include, so it's not just the Marvin Greenways, it would be any trail within the town?
These things that I just listed, those reports are just for this connector trail.
Just,
And so those, and that's an important consideration, and what we recommend going forward is that just to complete this 800 linear feet of trail and the footbridge is going to incur a significantly greater cost due to these reports than originally anticipated. So those are just for, when I say that I'm FEMA National Flood Insurance Program audit has been requested, that is village-wide. And when I say I hope everybody's ready to be caught out on that, is that, you know, people who have, you know, whenever, we'll get to this in a second, but there are probably a lot of people not in compliance in the village.
like C4 itself could be in non-compliance, right? I mean,
Theoretically,
right,
yes,
yeah.
theoretically, and not necessarily because zoning, not just trails,
Yeah, not just
anything.
trail, anything.
Anything because, well, I'll get to that in a second, and you'll see why. Okay, so here's the point that I think, I may be wrong, but I'm sensing a misconception out there. This is an oft-cited little tidbit from a FEMA publication that is very strong about a permit is required before construction or development begins within any special flood hazard area. Special flood hazard area includes both floodplains and floodways, and a permit is required. and development is construed very broadly to include any kind of grading, excavation, fill, and so on, so would encompass a trail. I think where people are misconstruing this is that it sounds like you are applying to FEMA for the permit, and that is not the case. FEMA is not a permitting agency. The permit that is required here is issued by the Village of Marvin. These publications are directed at the public, informing them that before they build a fence, build a barn, build a house, that they need to get a flood permit from their community, not from FEMA. So the role of FEMA is huge. It does a lot of things, but when it comes to floodplain compliance, it has one very specific role, and that is to manage the National Flood Insurance Program. It is not a permitting agency, it is an insurance program. So the way it works is that FEMA develops these flood maps based on their engineers. They generate the maps, and they also have, input from structural engineers on the best building practices. But the purpose of all of this is to set insurance rates. So the best building practices are established such that with a economic balance in mind of what can you do in these areas and mitigate danger either to yourself. A lot of them are very public facing to prevent us from building places we shouldn't be building. Or if we do, to make sure that we build it in a way that mitigates harm to ourselves, like putting houses on stilts in coastal floodways, and so on. And also to make sure that anything you build doesn't become unmoored in a flood and then harm someone else. So it includes minimum practices. And the way that this is implemented is that FEMA establishes these minimum codes, building codes. The communities that need the insurance, which is everyone, then must adopt at least the minimum standards. They can adopt more stringent standards. We have adopted the regular standards. And these hazard maps are then used to set the rates of insurance. So when it says that a permit is required, absolutely a permit is required, that permit comes from the Village of Marvin, not from a government agency with regard to floodplain. The issues with DEQ are a little bit different, but in this case, we're talking about the Village of Marvin issuing itself its own permit. So and then, of course, there's you can see this is our floodplain ordinance that specifies to the public, and it applies to us, that that a floodplain development permit is required. From the Local Administrator's Handbook for Floodplain Management, this highlights the fact that this is an insurance program. And the sole purpose of this is to provide insurance for flood. Theoretically, a cash-based, very risk-tolerant community could not adopt any of these. They simply would not be able to get insurance. No one's going to come in with a wrecking ball or do anything. You just wouldn't be able to get insurance. Now, we do live in a society that mortgages are required. Mortgage companies require flood insurance if you are impacted by a flood area. Thus, this is a requirement. So if you are not in compliance, if you're not in compliance as a community, and it's a systemic kind of thing, the flood insurance program can decide to impose surcharges and can place the community on probation, not making insurance available, which obviously would be a significant hardship for the reasons I just stated. Mortgage companies require insurance. So it is pretty important that, these things get complied with for the benefit of the community in terms of both the safety of complying and the issues with being able to have the requisite insurance. However, there is, if you read through the handbooks and all of the verbiage that FEMA puts out, outside of the actual statutes itself, you can see that there is a significant intention to balance economic use of things in the floodplain with the fact that we need to try and mitigate any dangers to people and property. For example, in this excerpt from a study guide for local officials, it specifically directs that they have discretion to exempt insignificant activities. So for example, if your property touches a floodplain, if we did not exempt certain small activities, every time you plant an azalea, without a permit, you are in violation of this, if we want to take this to the extreme. Obviously, that is impractical for people to have to get permits to do very small things, especially on a property by property basis. So it advises and encourages that the ordinances set out things that do not need permitting if and probably in contact with the flood insurance program administrator, say, hey, we're going to exempt these things. What do you think of that? The administrator says, yeah, those are good things to exempt. And so you can. Now, in our current ordinances, these things are not clear. This is another place where we could use some improvement. However, the ordinances are being revised as we speak. There's going to be our May council meeting. I believe these will be on the agenda. And hopefully this will help to clear up some of these issues when the ordinances are revamped. All right, so when a zoning permit is submitted to Marvin, say to build a house, to build a barn, whatever, there is a line on there where you have to declare whether or not your property includes flood zone. And you have to submit a survey that shows where your property is going to be built in relation to said floodplain. So if it's outside of it, you don't need insurance and the zoning permitting goes as is. If you're inside the floodplain, you still get to go ahead. It's just you have to conform with the minimum construction standards that are required by FEMA in order to get your insurance on that object or that structure. So floodplain permitting is essentially baked into every zoning permit that we have. These, however, are, because we are a very small ship with a small staff and a small budget, these things are a lot of times self-reported, and I believe Hunter does his very best to ascertain that all of these are being complied with. However, that does not prevent some episodes of non-compliance, and this is what I was talking about a few minutes ago, that in the village-wide audit might turn up some interesting things, is because anybody who has failed to apply for a zoning permit when they should, might get caught out. And the way that this could happen completely innocently is another issue with the ordinances, is, for example, in our ordinances currently, you do not need a permit to build a fence. However, if your fence is going to be in the floodplain, you do need a permit because that is a development. Now, you don't need a variance because in that part where I talked about the exempt encroachments, a fence that was at least 80% open was one of those things that is not an encroachment that requires a variance, but it theoretically should still require a permit. I don't think anybody in this community, if they're like, oh, I don't need a permit to build a fence, then goes to the floodplain thing and says, oh, maybe I need a permit here. A lot of people probably have not applied for permits that they probably should have. That is one of the things that could be clarified in the ordinance, is to put a broad, header on our permitting ordinances that says if you're in a floodplain, different rules apply.
Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
How often is a floodplain or flood zone updated?
Oh, that was my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so I don't think it's on a regular cycle like the cicadas and everything, but if you go back and you look at the Union County map, floodway maps, there are some layers that you can select that show the previous ones. I think the one before the current one was 2009, and the current one I think we're working on was 2021.
The reason I was
something like that?
asking the question was
Yes.
historical rains that we're currently having for the last 4 or 5 years.
Yes,
What was once not a flood area
Exactly.
has become a flood area.
yes.
So as part of this parcel of this process, is Marvin going to relook at the flood zones for Marvin?
We are not empowered to look at the flood zones like that. We are empowered. It's a process, and it's an expensive one. So it would be something that we would have to devote resources to. because in order to change the map, we would have to say, hey, we have an issue here. And then we would have to have the appropriate study done to present what is called a letter of map revision. And then that goes and FEMA takes that under consideration and says, oh, look, okay, yeah, we're going to adjust the maps, which then in turn affects everyone's insurance rates because people who were not previously in flood might now be. And so you don't have to take a wrecking ball to what was originally built properly, but it may affect your insurance rate.
Just a quick Google search. FEMA is required to update flood maps every 5 years.
So it is
So
cyclical.
FEMA is
Excellent.
5 years.
Yep, FEMA's
So it
fine.
is like.
It is cyclical. I would say, I wasn't convinced of that from the maps that I looked at, but that may be what Union
No,
County was
that-
putting
okay.
up.
But
That's
then the
good to know.
individual homeowner or property owner, sorry, is responsible to pay attention to that. So if I bought my house 10 years ago, maybe it wasn't in a floodplain, and now I could have theoretically had 2 cycles of.
If you were doing a new improvement
Mhm.
and you need to get you would need to get a new survey,
Mhm.
which is kind of part and parcel of the permitting process anyway. So if you're getting a new zoning permit, you would have to get a new survey, and that survey the surveying companies are required to use the
Okay.
updated maps.
But to your point about the fence, didn't think I needed one for a fence.
Exactly.
So I'm not calling anybody to get a permit because I don't know I'm in a floodplain. These are all theoretical because I'm not in one. So,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. And so, so these are the places where completely innocently people can be
Exactly.
out of compliance.
Right.
Uh,
That's what I was getting.
Yes, absolutely. And so if you are in a floodplain though, and you already have insurance, like if you have
Sure.
elements that are already in and the flood map changes, your insurance rate will just change because FEMA will know.
Yeah.
And they will know that you were in it or out of it. And your mortgage company may check up on you as well. If the new maps come out, the mortgage companies may have a risk assessment
They
team
would.
that is charged with doing that. Now,
Yeah.
how well staffed they are and how quickly they get to it, who knows? So misrepresentation by applicants is another reason for non-compliance. This one's a little bit more devious. But it can happen where people just either innocently or kind of because they don't want to be bothered, just say, no, I don't have a floodplain. And so this could be caught out in the zoning permit process. Hunter would then go in and look at the map for the process, for the property, and then find it and hopefully catch it. The other is that sometimes people say on their survey that they are going to build in a certain location and then they build in a different location. And innocently or intentionally may not realize that they have now placed their construction in a floodplain. So in the course of this village-wide audit, some of these things may come to light. And it might affect some of our previously built trails. I don't know. But if you look at the trail maps, most of them are not in floodway, which is like the really tricky one. Most of them would be in floodplain. And if they were built by a development, presumably then the floodplain permitting would have been done with the development zoning plan. So if it's a plat, like in Marvin Creek's HOA, I think, was it you who mentioned, that one could be potentially out of compliance? And honestly, the flood map did include a significant portion of Marvin Creek HOA's development along Marvin Branch Creek in like the 2009 or 2007 one. But based on the fill that they do, that's another thing that can happen is you can fill and change the flood. So now those houses are no longer in floodplain. And you can get removed from the floodplain with the development activity. So presumably in the platting of that development, that the fact that that concrete path runs in the floodplain was hopefully already addressed, but that was like 2007, I think, when Marvin Creek was platted. So that's way beyond the knowledge of most people here as to what exactly was looked at, or even what the ordinances looked like at the time. Okay, so the requirement of a permit does not preclude development in the floodplain. If it did, Florida would be uninhabited. I lived in Florida for 2 years. The entire state is a floodplain. The requirements are that if you are going to go build in the floodplain, you need to adhere to these best practices that I already talked about. The primary one of which for a structure that you're going to live in is that the bottom floor is a certain height above base flood elevation as established by the FEMA maps. And once you have hit that floor, you're good to go. And so in the course of construction, when your ground floor is laid, like, if it's a concrete slab or whatever, you have to get an engineer to come in, a surveyor, and come in and certify the height of that. That goes to the permitting people. They say, great, you're in compliance, check, proceed with your project. Then compliance with those elements are what set your insurance rates. It doesn't mean you don't get to do it. It just determines how you have to do it and what your insurance rate is after the fact. All right, so as we already, the other thing is that if you have a non-conforming structure in a floodplain, so say you're not going to have a base flood elevation thing that's of the right height, or you're going to do fill, for example, like with the developments, if you're going to do fill that tries to remove you out of a floodplain, it doesn't mean you can't do it. Once again, it simply means that you must go through a process, varying expense. The process is to submit this letter of revised map. So, for example, if the engineer looking at the footbridge over the creek on the preserve property were to certify it as no rise, meaning it would not have an impact on the floodplain or the base flood elevation, easy peasy. I mean, getting the engineer's thing is an expense and time, but at that point, we're ready to go ahead. If the engineer says it's good, we can issue our own permit for that. However, if he says that, he or she says that that is going to cause a rise of a certain amount, if we were dedicated to doing that, theoretically, what would continue on from there is that we would then submit a letter of revised or a letter of map revision, which would then change the contours of the flood map upstream from that element. And then that gets incorporated into the map. So there's time and process, and then that's the only place where you're sort of getting into a pseudo permitting process with FEMA is these letters of map revision. But once again, it's theoretically possible to do all of these things. It just means you have to go through the hoops. So, and then of course, to your point, the flood maps do change over time. Developments that were currently encroach may have been permissible when executed and they're grandfathered in. Not to beat a dead horse, but then the insurance rate changed. Okay, so the difference between floodplains and floodway. This is super important. Floodplains are the broad area defined by a 100-year flood based on computer mapping models. All right, so these computer mapping models, I know this is a long one, I'm gonna go as fast as I can. So the floodway is the narrower channel that I won't even go over how they come to it, but it's the narrow channel essentially where the creek or stream or river actually runs, and a little bit of stuff to either side, based on a fancy computer model that the engineers need to issue a no-rise certificate. All right, so floodplains and floodways are treated very, very differently by FEMA. They encourage in floodplains, because once again, there's a balance between economic use of these areas and mitigating danger, is they encourage them to be used as open spaces, recreational areas, playgrounds, reforestation, parking, gardens, pasture, and created wetlands. And in another publication that I could not re-find my citation to, because somehow my history got messed up in my browser, I actually found another handbook from FEMA that actually recommended campgrounds and sports fields in these areas. So as you can imagine, those things require a lot of grading and fill, but so long as they are flat and preserve the drainage aspects of the floodplain, it seems to be that FEMA is overall on board. And once again, the floodplain restrictions are dedicated to keeping us mostly safe from ourselves, whereas the floodway is narrower and restricted and is directed to preventing increases in the flood elevation. So only small parts of the floodplain restrictions are concerned with how they affect flood, namely, how dense is your fence? If your fence is dense, and doesn't allow water to pass, it may cause a rise in flood. And so in the floodplain restrictions, that is sort of a consideration, but that is the entire intent of the floodway.
And I
restrictions.
think it's also important, the nature of the greenway itself, whether it's pervious or impervious. So whether you have something that's paved or
Yes.
whether it's a more natural type of substrate,
That
type of
can
trail or
drain and
greenway.
absorb.
Exactly. I have to assume that when they were talking about parking lots, that they were talking about pervious parking lots.
Yeah, I wouldn't
Hopefully,
assume, but they should be.
Yes, they should be more specific about that, but that is a critical point, is that when the permitting, when the communities that are issuing the permits, have to confront these things, they are making evaluations based on things like, is it still going to operate as a floodplain?
And even as we look at the master plan for where trails are, things like that, there are some areas that are going to lend themselves more to, more of a sidewalk or asphalt or things like that.
Right.
Versus others that'll be, stone or shavings or, any of the other methods that we use for more natural pervious paths.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, and so once again, floodway restrictions are much more stringent. They are directed to not increasing the flood height. But if you are proposing something, because a lot of times these things have to be done. If you have a road that has to go over a floodway, you're going to have to do it. In that case, you can still accomplish it with a letter of map revision. Now, in this case, we're not talking about in a critical artery, we're talking about a trail. But I just want to point out that these things are all possible. All right, so looking at the locations in question, the green line is the approximate, I'm trying to follow it through the trees and we zoomed in. But the green line on the left-hand larger picture is the concrete trail from Marvin Creek HOA. And the one marked in red is the approximate location of the connector trail that is at issue. And you can see where, I say, probably end up bumping me back. I don't know how to get it back out.
So the top green is the.
Yes, so the green area here is the concrete trail that is in existence. And the red down here is approximately the proposed trail, because of course it's a little harder to see on satellite because it isn't in yet. And I want to point out that the Marvin Creek HOA property ends here. And then where it crosses the floodway is on the preserve side. And that is where there would have to be a footbridge. You'll see in the photos in a minute that is quite a deep stream channel. There are a couple of drainage ditches that lead away from the Marvin Creek HOA properties that drain into the floodway. However, they in and of themselves are not floodway. They are, for the most part, included in the blue flood plain. The yellow is future floodplain and does not have, at present, doesn't have any restrictions on it. So then in the smaller picture, we have sort of the original path, which was located closer to the cul-de-sac, I am told. And it was sort of a concern that it seemed that the exit for the trail was too close to the properties impacted at the end of the cul-de-sac. And so it was shifted to join the concrete trail further in this photo to the left where the green mark is. And then when realigning that to the topography that's there, that is what pushed a portion of the trail into the floodway. And the movement of that trail was done on the ground. So part, I think, of where we went wrong here, or where a mistake was made, is not paying attention, like we were just talking about a minute ago with fences and whatever, is that when the trail was shifted, you need another survey to determine where on the ground
Floodway is.
you are in relation to the floodway. It's not sufficient to go out and look at the ground and say, oh, I think that's about where the floodway is. So that was one place where sort of the ball probably got dropped. Okay, so All right, so then to talk about the flooding, because I know the flooding is a concern. We had this major rain event, and to Bob's point, we have, we're seeing more flooding. I personally do not think that this flooding is caused by the trail in particular, given that it wasn't constructed yet and we had that massive. But obviously then the concern is, well, if we already have increased flooding and we put the trail in, are we asking for even worse? In this case, that's one of the places where I'm going to leave everybody to their own conclusions. However, I did want to provide a little perspective, because in the photos that were included in the packet when Mrs. Thomas came, it indicated that this flooding event was 4 feet deep. And trust me, it was a big one. However, I went out and took photos of where that picture was taken from. And so if you see here, these are the same trees. So this tree has this little fork, and this tree comes in like this. Here is that tree, it's a red bud, and here is that other tree right there. This is the thing that's sticking out of the water. And from the trail and from this picture, it looks like you're standing right level with it. However, I went down and took a picture, and this gentleman up here is my husband for scale, and you can see where he is standing up on the trail. And yes, that is about 4 feet deep, but it's actually in the stream channel, more or less. So good, bad, indifferent, this flood event did exactly what the map predicted. It flooded where it predicted it would flood. It would flood this trail if this trail were built, which is, once again, something for everybody's personal conclusions. One of the problems with building in a floodway is that if it's in a floodway and we're constantly washing out material, because that does inundate more frequently, then that's a maintenance nightmare. However, the floodplain and the kind of flooding event we just saw, is that a regular occurrence? Is it going to become a more common occurrence? Do we want to build places where that material will get washed away, or we have to do a lot of repairs? So that is for everybody's personal consideration. And then just so that you can see where the seating actually makes it, it's like this like Wizard of Oz like trail. So the bottom left photo is at the beginning of the trail, standing on the concrete path of the Marvin Creek HOA. And then the bottom right photo is the far end is a continuation of what you see in the far end of the first photo. And the top photo is where the trail was rerouted around that stand of trees and into the floodway. The creek is right here. It's down deep in its bank, but it's right here. So the trail did end up getting very close to the creek bed there. And then
It is deep.
yes, and then that is where the footbridge were
That's part
required.
of its problem.
Yes, is there were, in the previous pictures, oops, I want to go back.
That's one of the reasons it's flooding.
So across some of these areas, you can't even see it because they're relatively shallow, but I think probably no, not right there. Right about here, there is a channel that funnels drainage from the development towards the creek. And that in and of itself is deep, that one is deep enough to require a small footbridge as well. But it's not really deep. It's just, we would have to, it wouldn't be a footbridge so much as a culvert with dirt over it. So then you can see here the depth of where the bridge would be. And pretty much on the edge of this creek is where the preserve property begins. So I'm guessing, once again, without a survey, you're just sort of guessing that the preserve property, I'm imagining, probably runs along this line, and then that bridge goes over there. All right, so those are the in-depth flood considerations that I want everybody to just absorb and bring into your consciousness and make your own decision. As far as Department of Environmental Quality and the Water Resource Board, these things do require permits. In this particular case, I have been told that through verbal communication, which isn't currently being documented, that the heel splitter buffer is 200 feet from the top of the bank. Well, that's coded, that's not verbal communication, but that In this particular case, everything was incidental and the heel splitter was not considered impacted and the permit was not required. That puts us in a weird position, right? If a permit is not required, how do you document
That is not.
that it's not required? So do you do a permit anyway? Maybe we do. But in most cases, the buffer for the heel splitter is wider than the floodplain, so complying with one often it includes compliance with the other. And the water protection requires that activities do not discharge into the waterway. Once again, though, there are exceptions for things that are very incidental and minor. And it's a case-by-case basis as to whether or not those things happen. All right, so the role of this board in all circumstances, I think we all know this, but for the public record, we are volunteers who are confirmed by council and we're not elected or appointed. This board makes non-binding recommendations to council in matters pertaining to development or non-development. We do not have to recommend that we do anything with a park or a greenway, but to the extent that we think that the community wants it, desires it, or would be benefited by it, we make those recommendations. When we do make a recommendation, it is dependent on council to move forward with it and staff to execute. I wanted to make sure we all had this information so that as we go forward and discuss what we're going to do about this trail, if anybody has opinions, and what we're going to do about other things in the future, that we're all operating at least on a basis of information. And if I get more information that helps clarify, I will come and share it at a future meeting. And that we are guided generally by the interests of the community. However, we do have to weigh the interests of a few impacted people. Nobody ever wants these things going past their property. And as one of the impacted homeowners, I get that. But also the community at large benefit also has to be weighed against that. So on a case-by-case basis, I think we have to weigh the pros and cons of proposals, including their cost and how easy they are to execute and the impacts that they might have and the mitigating impacts, such as like screening and stuff like that, that we might be able to provide. All right, so the concerns raised in the petition were increased risk and liability, exacerbated flooding, compromised privacy and security, increased crime risk, disturbing the wildlife and wetlands, the improper transfer of the trail easement by the HOA, and a lack of permitting. So I think we've covered all of those. My only comment about the improper transfer of a trail easement by the HOA is that is so outside of our purview that I personally can't use that as a particular consideration. Because if it got approved by the HOA, I can only assume that HOA followed its own parameters. And had the approval of a majority of people or whatever is in their documents. It's really difficult for this body or council to try and second guess that process on somebody's behalf. So once again, these are all valid concerns that any impacted homeowner might have. I think over the course of the last hour, we've addressed them. And everybody can, on a case-by-case basis going forward, and in this particular case, everybody can make their own determination on that. I do want to end with one quick note with regard to the flooding issue. And we will discuss that more at the next agenda. But I personally believe that the greatest contributor to the increased flooding that we are seeing is not only climate change and increased rain, which is a consideration how we're going to deal with that going forward, but that also I have witnessed personally on Marvin Branch Creek a lot of trash and debris that block up the creek. Last winter, I removed a pallet from the creek bed.
You mean literally trash?
Like literally
Not
trash.
just
No, like
wild trash.
not wild trash, but literally trash. I removed a pallet from the creek bed. And during this last rain event, there was a child's sled that got wedged between two trees. And these kinds of things, of course, create blockages and rises, and those are not related to these construction activities, but just debris and trash in the community, in addition to fallen trees and
Leaves.
things that get bumped up against, obstructions like other trees, and then create beaver dams, essentially. Also, beaver dams themselves are an issue in some areas of the county, and so the Village of Marvin is seeking grant money to make funds available to the HOAs and communities to employ that money to help clean up these creeks.
I have a comment on cleaning up. We need to talk about.
Well,
what
that's
that
gonna be a
means.
future agenda
Good,
item is
yeah.
how this could.
Because clean is not always good.
Exactly, and that is that goes-
Restored is better.
That goes with the final point is that with the increased scrutiny on this, we're all going to have to tread very carefully with what clean up actually means.
Yeah.
Like, was I in violation for removing the pallet? Or is that kind of okay because it's trash?
Because you built a beaver dam.
You know, in deference to, you know, the neighbors around who didn't necessarily want an increased flood, I thought it was best to remove it. So the focus on the Marvin Creek portion of the trail was one of the things that we dropped the ball on, where the preserve property with the bridge, kind of, because there was so much back and forth with the HOA at Marvin Creek, that's where the focus was. The other problem was failing to officially do our own permitting. Just observing that the permit would be permissible isn't sufficient. The permit actually needs to be recorded. Failure to recognize on the ground that rerouting the trail had resulted in an encroachment is another potential issue. Confusion with our ordinances is a problem. Confusion or streamlining and really nailing down who's responsible for what with regard to implementing these things is another thing we need to address. These things are all mostly on a staff level and not necessarily the purview of this board, but for, in the interest of full disclosure, these are some of the things that are at issue here. And the ones that affect us is, of course, lack of communication with PR&G once these issues came to light so that we knew this was going on. You know, I think I've tried to cover a lot today. With my apologies for the length, but if we want to, we can also get like a FEMA training or a DEQ training if anybody feels that it's necessary to take a deeper dive. And so once the ordinances are cleaned up, hopefully some of this will get cleared up. All right, so the current status of this trail is that the Marvin Creek HOA has, at least about a month ago now, has requested return of the easement if work on the trail cannot be completed before the end of 2024. Council did not receive this request in time for its agenda of the last meeting. So if we have a recommendation, we have time to give one. The decision has not been made.
This
It is-
recommendation would need to be a vote, by the way.
Yes. The likelihood of expense and timing is very unlikely that we would get this done before 2024. So the offer here is that at least with regard to the board, which is the only people, you know, legally that we can, you know, work with on the actual easement, because they're the ones who, you know, control it, is that they're only requesting the easement back if we can't complete the work this year. It is up to council whether or not to agree to that stipulation, return it now, or never return it. So there ends the presentation. As an affected property owner, I'm going to sort of abstain from discussion of whether or not it should be returned and the trail, because I don't want to be accused of any bias in that regard. So does anyone have thoughts or concerns?
Just the first thing, I'd like to really thank you for really digging in, doing a lot of research and preparing this presentation. I know you and I had spoken about a couple of the items,
Yes.
but the extent to which you really
Yeah, no, I
went
apologize
in.
for going over time. I feel like this is
That's
an important
okay.
issue.
No, you needed to do
Yeah,
that level of
I think that was very good, and I just wanted to point that out, and thank you for being so comprehensive.
Thank you. Yeah,
Let me ask a question.
absolutely.
If we were to move forward on the easement, let's say, we're getting ready to spend $33,000 is my understanding.
Just on the initial approvals, permitting, survey and stuff like that.
For the connector trail.
For the connector trail, and
Plus the
then
18.
plus the 18 to install. And if they determine that there are any issues, for example, if they do redraw the wetland boundaries,
If we return the easement,
so on and so forth.
do we prevent the expenditure of the $33,000 and $18,000 that we could use somewhere else for the benefit of the community?
Theoretically, yes. John?
I'm not sure if council is already committed to that $33,000 because we kind of need to know what could be affected already. So we have our work session and meeting tonight. So
Mhm.
I don't know yet to be able to report anything back on that.
I'm not saying where I'm at on this. This
Yeah.
connector trail really isn't part of the original trail plan, correct?
Well, that is an issue of some contention because it is shown on that map that was generated by the outside community in the sense that it's included in C4. Right? So if C4 were ever completed, it would be an integral part of that. It is what connects the Marvin Creek HOA cement trail to Village Hall, frankly. If it connects with the preserve, it will connect all the way here. This is the last little bit that would connect to
So-
Village Hall. So it is,
I think it was shown on the map, but it wasn't
included.
delineated as a specific C7 or C10 or.
well, it would be part of
It-
C4. would
Yeah,
not?
it was considered part of one. It was shown on the map, but it wasn't
It was not its
necessarily
own
called
line.
out. Yeah.
Well,
I think Austin.
One quick note, that tonight the council will be discussing the environmental studies for this trail. That is a separate discussion than the complete audit of all of our village trails. That's a separate scope of work, separate contract, which I believe has already been approved. So if, for example, the council tonight decides to return the easement, they may choose not to expend the funds on the actual study since there wouldn't be a trail there.
So that's my question. The 33,000 is specifically for
That
this
is
trail.
for
And then
this
there's
trail.
other, yeah, okay.
That is for this
Okay,
trail. only.
thank you.
I guess where I'm landing right now is just as thought is to return the easement, reapply our dollars to some other activity for the benefit of the community. That's where I'm landing.
Okay. Now, just playing devil's advocate with that, that means that this trail probably never, this connection never gets made.
My feeling is you now, the access to it is now very limited, right, to just the preserves, correct? I mean, so,
Well, no, because the preserve trail connects down here to Village Hall.
agreed, but
Right.
if we are promoting walking and accessibility, most folks would end up driving and parking in this parking lot, correct? As opposed to the residents who live in the Marvin Creek side and the other neighborhoods on Joe Carr that would, continue to kind of utilize that pathway. So I feel like we're not, a little short-sighted on the cost, right? When you think of the population that sits on the other side of the community. The other thing I see is also looking at the map of the floodplain for C4, which shows even more distance, correct? That goes into the floodplain than this little piece here. So we've already got a sidewalk in the floodway that we're now saying is, I guess we can't change that, but now the little piece here is now much smaller, I guess, as I look at it today. So
It is a small piece if
Mhm.
I'm just playing devil's advocate because, if it is a small piece, but if it is put in, it is sort of a critical connector between
yeah.
the stuff north of Joker
Mhm.
and through Marvin Creek's development down here to Village Hall. People do park here at Village Hall and walk the trails.
Mhm.
I can also attest that a tremendous number of people they don't park there usually, but use Saddle Avenue,
Mhm.
whether they're coming from Firethorn or
Mhm.
whatever, they use Saddle Avenue and then they walk through Marvin Creek to get
Mhm.
to Marvin Elementary, pick up their kids and drop them off by walking. And there's a lot of recreational activity that's in that area as well. And some of those people, theoretically, I mean, looking at a community-wide benefit would potentially use that connector. Is
So
that
is
good
the-
or is that bad?
So is the connector, let me ask this question. How many, well, I know we don't know the answer, but how many people use the trails currently?
No idea.
They're very low. I'm out there all the time. The second question is the connector trail going to be relevant to get to the amphitheater that I know that the village wants to move forward with?
From this area, it would connect that. Without a close study of the map, I can't really say if there aren't alternative routes. If it gets completed, if there's a Marvin Road element that gets completed, that might connect, but
And actually,
This would be the most
specific to
direct
the amphitheater, what the council, at least at this point, has voted on is really just a phase one of that village park that does not include the amphitheater. Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. Whether it's something that they continue to look at in the future, that's a whole different story. But at this point, it's really just, there will be a kind of trail in the village hall area, as well as mitigating some of the issues that we have on this site from a water control situation.
I appreciate it.
Question two, is this the first time we're actually connecting two other neighborhoods? I'm trying to think of all the greenways, right? I mean, because now, because I feel like these greenways then become very neighborhood centric, right? It's the Preserves Greenway, it's the Marvin Creek Greenway.
A
Is
lot
it-
of them are very
Exactly.
isolated.
Is this the
and-
first one I'm trying to think that's formally being connected? Because, or I guess
We're going to be connecting Amber Meadows and
to
Tullamore.
Tullamore, okay. Mhm. So I just wonder, does that cause more because you're not, is that feeding into the bullet on crime and access, right? Because now it's, I mean, I know certainly Canterfield Creek is a pathway to all the greenways, right? We don't have a
Yes.
formal, greenway, but I don't know, I just wondered, this is.
Yeah, and I mean,
the
that's
opportunity
relevant
to-
for the people of Kenner,
Mhm.
that if they have no access to, if they have no greenways within their own development,
Mhm.
is this sort of a, a community-wide, benefit to people who don't otherwise have access. I mean, that is another consideration to
The-
weigh in the balance.
The only other trail that connects neighborhoods is the Marvin Loop, which connects all the way from the preserve to Marvin Creek to the elementary school, around on the Joe Carr Road, and would provide connectivity to Canterfield Creek. I can't remember, can you get to Bridle Path by crossing?
We have to
Joe
cross
Carr?
Joe Carr, all of these, I
Mhm.
mean,
Okay.
it's not.
See, that's your only other trail that really provides connectivity, inner neighborhood connectivity.
So just to move meeting along, does anybody feel strongly enough about this that they want to make a recommendation? Do we have any kind of consensus? Are you in favor for giving back?
I'm not in favor.
And so you're in favor of keeping the easement?
Mhm.
Jen, do you have an opinion?
I am in favor of giving it back, given the cost estimates of what it would take to complete this trail. I think the money, I agree with Bob, could be spent in better ways in our community.
Okay, even though it negates this in perpetuity.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
What happens when we're split? Because we're only four, since you're abstaining.
So legally, Jen cannot abstain here. Just a step in. There is no abstentions except in certain certain zoning considerations. She would have to be recused by the board, and that is usually only for a financial conflict of interest.
Okay,
Sorry,
well then
but I get your point.
yes, my point is not to direct the.
No,
not to
I
direct the
completely
decision.
understand your reasoning there. Yeah.
Do you have
I would keep the easement, sorry.
you would keep the easement, you would keep the easement, you would give it back? You would give it back?
Yeah.
Oh, boy.
I'm so sorry.
Okay, so do we even want to if the board is split, do we even want to make a recommendation? We don't have to.
We don't have to make a recommendation.
Okay.
I mean, but that is sort of what we say as our job.
It is-
This board may also doesn't have to make a recommendation to do one thing or to do another. The board could make a recommendation to do something alternative to what's being discussed. So that's totally up to you guys.
I think the other thing is that I don't know that it needs to be determined right now. The specifics of the request, I believe, is whether or not it would be completed by the end of 2024. So there is still a time factor in
There is
there
that,
at
but by
play.
then we have committed the potentially the $33,000.
Correct. And I think that's a conversation that council's going to make anyway, because you don't control the money one way or the other.
Well, no, exactly, but
that-
that's
that-
part of our recommendation
Yeah.
thing is
Is whether the money.
is that's
could be
why I
used
spent
somewhere
all this time doing it, is so that our recommendations are only helpful if they take into account things, even if they're outside of our purview.
The thing that's very difficult to answer from is the usage of the connector trail.
Mhm.
If it's going to be high usage, maybe a $33,000 plus 18,000 is a good investment.
Mhm.
but I have no idea of what the usage is. And for people just to go spend money, because it sounds like a great idea to connect a trail when it's not going to be used, doesn't seem appropriate to me. I would really, and I'm not suggesting somebody go out there and with a counter and count people going through there, but it'd be handy to know what
But
we're
isn't that
talking
true of
about
all
here.
of our trails?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's almost off the table because that's always been an issue.
Yeah.
And the flip side of that, devil's advocate, since you keep bringing that up, is if you don't build it, nobody's going to walk on it.
If you can't get there,
Yeah,
it's not going to be
right.
utilized.
Well,
Then you're going to get in your car and sit in this parking lot over here out in the road because you can't get in the parking. Theoretically, it could happen. I mean, it happens on some big council nights, some big coffee with council nights, as a matter of fact. That's all, and again, devil's advocate, because I wasn't for scraping the road either. I mean, scraping the trail, because we can sit here and say that that didn't hurt anything, but I promise you that it did from a flooding perspective, because turf grass doesn't suck up much water. So anyway, that's a whole
Fair
nother
enough.
issue.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think we'll ever know, short of the clickers and the cameras and stuff.
So to the extent that I can opine at all, I can tell you this trail is probably would be one of the more used just because of
That's
what
what
it
I'm
connects
thinking.
and also the traffic we already get. My husband gets up at 6 a.m. to walk my dogs specifically because of the traffic on this trail.
Seriously.
Because my dogs are not super well behaved with other dogs around.
I'm on the trail almost every day.
This trail though?
This trail.
yeah, oh,
Oh, the Marvin Creek Trail. It's roughly a 3-mile walk from me.
Okay.
And I rarely see anyone on that trail. But I don't walk at the same time as your husband either. But there may be one of them.
Well, he goes specifically to avoid people, but because when he was going out later in the morning, there was a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
All right.
But you're
so-
saying there's traffic between school?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's a huge amount of traffic between Firethorn, my neighborhood, and getting to Marvin Creek, or to Marvin Elementary.
So that's going and coming back home?
Mhm. So now would they go down, like towards Village Hall? I don't know, but these are a lot of people who seem inclined to walk.
Yeah, no,
And I think that the overall impact of what we've just proposed with regard to crushed concrete path is
I think Austin
minimal impact, but yes.
needs to share something and whether or not we need to excuse a board member.
Well, that's a separate thing. I believe Jen has left unexcused,
Yes.
so that does not interfere with quorum or anything, so that's a separate issue.
she took. her
Based
shot.
on my research right now, if the board does decide to someone decides to make a motion right now, Jen, you cannot recuse yourself from this because there's no financial impact.
Okay.
That is up to the board if anyone wants to make a motion, either to keep the easement or to return it.
Okay. So does anybody want to make a motion to keep it or return it?
Before we do that, and I know we've been sitting here for a while, but we can live through it. Because usually we get out of here really fast, and so we,
I do
at
try to
some,
keep
at
them under
some
an hour
point, you gotta
usually,
pay.
Yeah.
So your point, Austin, was we could also think of something else.
Yes, you can. That is.
I can't think of anything else, but I'm working on it. I wonder if we lay out the concerns, the money,
Mhm.
the usage,
Mhm.
but the point about that this is potentially a great connector. Those are the three things that we're looking at, and we need to make sure that they're going to look at that. I'm sure they are, but that this is what we're basing our opinion on.
Mhm.
Is there those are the three main points, right? The money, because it could be a sunk cost and we could spend $1 million over there and never get what we want. Or 33 could be a cheap deal for 100 people to use it every day. I'm making numbers up,
I mean, I think if we commit, the trail could be built. I mean, there is a point at which if we throw enough money at it, it could be
Well,
built.
anything can be built.
Yes, you bring a big enough suitcase of money, you can pretty much accomplish anything you want. So, I mean, if we held on to the easement, trail could eventually be built.
So my reasoning for saying hold it is because you've got it.
Mhm.
That's why I don't know that we should go build a trail, but I wouldn't give the easement back until I knew
Until
for
we
sure.
know for sure
Yes.
about the.
That's my reason for it, because it was given for whatever reason.
Mhm.
We weren't involved in that.
Mhm.
That's my reason.
Okay, so do we want to recommend that council holds on to the easement for the time being?
That was my opinion. Yes,
While-
I'm not speaking for anybody else.
While the rest of the, well, we have to make a motion, so somebody's
Yeah,
gonna
no,
have to.
no, I'm just saying, that's my opinion.
Yeah,
that
no,
we-
no, no.
That we
But
hold
to-
it because we've got it.
I think it
Don't tend
sounds
to
like a
give things
reasonable
back and-
statement that,
Yeah,
is that we
And do
hold
it.
it for now
do our due diligence.
and do our due diligence.
And we may give it back.
Can you make a formal motion?
She was trying.
Oh.
Yeah. She's better at that than me.
So do I hear a motion to recommend to council that we continue to hold the easement while we do our due diligence on the outstanding issues?
Let me, hold on.
Intervene, Austin. How can we do this?
All right, to recommend that the
Oh, you just
council
need to type.
retain the easement until, what'd you say?
Due
So we've
diligence.
completed our due
Complete
diligence.
diligence.
And what does due diligence mean?
Well,
Investigating
knew
the
you were gonna
compliance
ask that.
issues.
yeah.
Or, I mean, not in compliance, but investigating the permitting and, well, what were your three prongs?
The 33 cents,
cost,
the cost,
Usage.
the usage,
Thank you,
yes.
that was the one I was flailing for.
Okay, he doesn't like that.
He's trying to figure out how to phrase it. but,
I'm trying to figure out what exactly what you're recommending.
I
Because
know.
are you recommending for them just to consider certain points when they have this discussion later today?
Mostly, yes, yes. I think though, the general, over on this side, I think that the general recommendation is that we hold on to the easement and not give it back. Even if we don't build on it. In response to all of this.
Okay, hold on. I think I can wordsmith this.
Okay.
What are the things you want them to consider? Do you want them to consider cost of the studies?
Cost of
utility-
Cost of the studies,
Usage of the
potential
trail.
usage, because of the connectivity. Is it crucial? Is it a crucial connection in this great big plan that was started so long ago?
So cost of the studies, utility of the trail, anything else?
There were three things.
I feel like there were three prongs, but
They're worth.
unless we can rewind.
It was the cost.
And the connectivity, right? That was.
Yeah, okay, that's usage. They're kind of
Usage
the
and
same thing.
connectivity.
Right, I
Yeah,
guess
but
we're saying
then,
broadening the connect,
but-
yeah, the broadening the usage, right?
Okay, so here, how about this?
or we could just recommend.
All right, to recommend that the council retain the easement for now and consider the costs of the studies, the utility of the trail, and the connectivity that the trail would provide.
Yes.
And I think, Christina, what you're saying is just hold on to it for now. I mean, it seems like this 2024 is an effort to just kind of push a decision, right?
Yeah,
Without
yeah,
actually, you
Yeah,
know,
just
just.
hold on
yeah.
to it and
Mhm.
figure out if
Mhm.
this is viable or not, and is it worth it? Maybe those are the words. Is it worth all of this? Get my meaning? And money and pain, and is it viable? Is it worth this much effort for the good that it does?
So I mean, one really
still
silly
don't
thing
know
to
that.
throw in there though, is that given the Marvin Creek HOA's property, that
Mhm.
easement, we could very easily get all of the permitting issues, all the
Mhm.
wetland issues, well, most of the wetland issues, we might have to still look at that. But a lot of the issues that we're talking about pertain to the bridge and the
Mhm,
floodway,
mhm.
which is on a different parcel.
It's 50/50 Marvin Creek Preserve, just to correct that, because you're working on it as a map. Half is on Marvin Creek, half is on Preserve. It's not all on Preserve.
Don't engage.
It's both.
So the property that's on the preserve is the one that's in contention,
Mhm.
with the exception of a wetland survey. Potentially, we could pretty much build the trail on the Marvin Creek HOA easement and have a trail to nowhere.
Well,
But-
that won't help.
No, so that wouldn't help.
That
but
really does
just
not
to-
make
Just to sort of
connectivity
like
work.
isolate that trail is not the one that's causing all of the expenditure, like that portion of the trail is not, so we would be giving back the easement on the part that's the easiest to accomplish.
You're making-
So,
Half is Marvin Creek, half is the Preserve.
so,
One side of the bridge is on the Preserve, the other side is on Marvin Creek.
Have we got our,
so we got our motion?
Were you okay
Does
with the
it
wording
make
that I had
sense?
before, or do you want to change the wording? You want me to reread it and you tell me if you want to change it?
What
No,
you
the
just
wording
said
was
makes
good.
me even more committed to what I said. I mean.
Well, that's why I wanted to
what
throw
you-
it out there in
yeah.
case it affected anybody's thinking, is that the bulk of the expenditures are directed towards the bridge.
Yeah,
And
I did not quite get that before you said it, so, yeah.
So the motion I had before was to recommend the council retain the easement for now, consider the cost of the studies, the utility of the trail, and the connectivity that the trail would provide. Do you want me to alternate?
Yeah, you said utility, so I think usage is
Usage.
more clear that we mean people's feet on the trail.
Usage of the trail. Would you want to make any other alterations to that motion?
nope.
Okay, so someone could say so moved.
Anybody want to move for that?
I don't care, so moved.
All right, do I hear a second?
Second.
Second?
The Christinas have spoken.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Go with you.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
All right.
Just a note that we didn't say it for the record, Jen did leave unexcused at approximately 10:37. Just so you all know, for the sake of the record, whenever a board member leaves a meeting unexcused, they are still counted here as quorum and they count as a yes vote in all votes going forward.
Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for that point of procedure. All right. Woo. All right. That was a long one and we need to boogie. I know I'm on the next one here. Recommendation, we already did that, returning the easement. So number 3 is discussion and communications between PRG board, village council and village staff. So based on all of the stuff going forward, I think the initial, unless anybody else has any ideas, I know we talked about bringing Hunter in periodically to talk about stuff. However, Hunter only does the zoning part of it. So, I mean, I think Tyler's reports are still really the critical one. I think with regard to issues between council and this board, John and I are willing to commit to having a debrief every time the agenda is getting set, just to make sure that it includes all pertinent stuff.
I would feel
Does
like
that
if,
feel sufficient or?
not, maybe, that's the thing, we didn't know that this was a problem until it was
Until it was a problem.
post-problem, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's hard to know how to handle a situation before it blows up,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So I would prefer, if there seems like an issue, just an email to say, hey, this is some stuff that's going on that might affect this board. I
We
don't
do have
need
to
a
be-
special meeting. Please don't make it a special meeting that we have to
No.
all, because it'll take us 3 months to get that organized. No joke.
Well, we also have to be careful that we're not conducting business outside of the public.
I understand.
So a
That's where
notice, an
Austin
email
is.
notice, but no discussion. I guess.
Where do you want this email notice to come from? Do you
Well,
want-
the thing is,
Whoever has the info.
whatever, I mean, how are you going to know that it's a point that needs to be shared? That's the
That's very
problem.
subjective.
I know, of course it is. That's where how we got here.
If
So,
there's an issue that arises, for example, let's say that we're about 2 weeks away from a meeting and we're aware that we've had a catastrophic weather event, half the village trails are underwater, we need to consider, I don't know, making some sort of alteration to our recommended trail building standards. Obviously, that's complete hypothetical. That would be something we would obviously bring to a meeting. If we're within 3 days of meeting, we're having something big go on with the trail that council's gonna have to suggest immediately, this is something you probably would find out immediately after, once we have all the facts in place. I want to make sure that we're on the same page with expectations, but at the same time, staff knows what you guys want, really.
I know that for me, one of the issues is just being caught unaware that there's something kind of brewing and you don't know that. And so just to your point, you're in the grocery store and somebody asks you a question, I'd like to be able to say, I
heard
don't,
about that,
I-
working on it.
working on it, or you need to talk to so-and-so, because I probably don't have the answer and probably wouldn't share if I did. So you need to talk to so-and-so, and I don't know who so-and-so is. And unfortunately, it's going to be you.
And that's the safest bet, honestly, because I can direct them from there. If
That's
you
in the
guys know,
record.
for example, if someone is saying, if someone comes to you and they're talking about something about land use or development, that goes to Hunter. If it's something about the usage of an amenity, that's Tyler, that's our facilities. If it is a safety hazard that involves our facilities, that's Davy. Davy or Christina. If it's a public safety issue, that's Christina, and Christina would distribute to the deputies. If someone ever approaches you and discusses a safety issue where law enforcement needs to be involved, encourage them to call 911 if it is an emergency.
Yeah.
Don't tell them to call us first, because if there's an incident that needs an immediate response, calling
No,
us
no,
is not
no,
the
of
fastest
course,
way
of
to
course.
get it addressed. Generally though, if you get a general question you don't know the answer to, feel free to email me and I can direct it to the appropriate person. I don't have a problem with that. That's kind of my job as clerk, so.
On the off chance that we have another issue that comes up that looks like it might go down this path, then I still would say, I think it would be appropriate for I guess you,
I mean, it
John,
depends
to
on whether-
send this group a message, say, heads up, this is going down.
I think in the future,
Give us one.
Those messages should be distributed. If, for example, if I'm going to email you all or John is going to send you all a message, everyone should be blind carbon copied. That way, no one can see each other's responses. We don't want a discussion going on over email over village
And-
business.
and I think
It is
that's
just
worth
for the
re-
distribution of information.
And I think you would remind us that in this email, right?
Mhm.
I
Because
think
it's easy
here's
for
the
information.
possible future.
Yeah, for instance.
Our neighborhood is experiencing flooding.
I've seen the pictures, yes.
And
Yeah.
we've got pallets floating down the creeks and
Everybody's
tires
got
and
pallets.
so on and so forth. And I would ask Jen to put that on the agenda for the next meeting, because I think that's a serious community concern. And I don't think it's unique to Wyndham Hall. I think there's a lot of flooding in a lot of
Very
creeks
true.
that need to be addressed. And as we get into that, as we move forward, here, in my opinion, is a great opportunity for Hunter or whoever the appropriate, Davey or whoever it is you engage whoever it is with the flooding issue that we have in this community right now, and hopefully you will engage someone,
Mhm.
that you keep us up to speed so that periodically you come in and say, hey, we're going to give you an update on this agenda item. And that we're not caught unaware, and we can answer, and we understand our place, so to
Mhm.
speak. We know we're an advisory.
Mhm.
That's all, that's our role. All we're asking for is communication to us so we can make good decisions.
And we're always going to endeavor to do that. And you will be hearing more about flooding issues. It's going to continue. We have applied for a stream rehab grant
Oh, good.
that is due to be awarded in May. We're going to see if we get anything. So obviously, once we learn about what happens with that grant, we will let you all know. Just as a matter of fact.
Okay.
Yes, because I'm very interested in that.
Okay, so I think what we've resolved here to a certain extent is that knowing what is worthy of sharing is a bit subjective.
It's
but
completely
that-
subjective.
But that in everyone's best judgment, if there seems to be something brewing, the appropriate party who is privy to that information will then share it, whether it's coming to you as clerk, or if it's something that's popped up in council, you'll communicate it to me, and then I will disseminate to you guys. It may be just simply issue brewing, no information, no discussion,
No,
just
that's,
a heads up.
that's,
In the same way
And
too,
it
if
may
you
be-
guys learn of something that we might not be aware of.
Of course.
let us-
Yeah. Okay, so I think, and then John and I will, communicate before we set the agenda to make sure that at least when we get to the public part, the discussions on the agenda items will cover any of those things that are coming up.
Yeah, Austin, usually it's probably like the Tuesday before.
Yeah,
He-
Tuesday to Thursday.
So
depending-
that'll be kind of a reminder
that out to
for,
everybody. We're
for
all
Jen and
open.
I to
Yes.
just connect and say, hey, so in the past, we kind of looked at the agenda separately, but, Jen and I will just connect
Yeah,
closer
between
on it
council and
before
this
it gets
board,
set.
we will connect a little bit more directly before that instead of just
I don't-
everybody speaking for themselves. Okay, so unless that issue comes up with additional information, we'll leave that for right now. And to that end, there is another issue that there have been some objections to or not objections to, but there's been some discussion in like Coffee with Council. And John's going to bring us up to speed on the Part F funding for.
Yeah, and this speaks a little bit to Bob's question about the Village Hall Park and what we may be moving forward on. Council, at our last meeting, we did make a decision to move forward with what we call kind of phase one, and it has been referred to that in the past. Certainly, there were a number of things that had to do with the Village Hall Park that were pretty much wholly dependent on the GO bonds, whether they would be passed or not. You mentioned the amphitheater, which is a higher ticket item. That's certainly one of those things. So the way that the funding has broken down, right? We got the original Part F grant, which was for $500,000. So that $500,000, it's a matching grant. We have to put the money up front. So that does require us, to keep some monies in our balances and stuff so that we can cover those costs before they get reimbursed. We did, so at that point, it's basically, $500,000 coming from Part F, $500,000 coming from the Village of Marvin. Well, at the next point, we got another grant on top of that, which was for an additional $250,000, which would go to our portion of that $500,000. So at that point, to move forward with the phase one, which is essentially the grading, some grading work, the initial proposed path. We've seen renderings of it, but we haven't paid for a specific plan in place yet. We weren't going to dedicate those monies until we actually know what we're moving forward with. So that's the $250,000 would be left to us as the Village of Marvin to put in. And of that $250,000, there's about 120 to 130 of it that would have to be spent anyway. So
drainage.
that has to do with the drainage from the big pipe that DOT installed under the road that, even after we were built here, that kind of started flooding and kind of going around and has caused us to talk about the rain garden and, other
How much
things.
did you say? How much money?
About $120,000 to $150,000. So, that money would have to be spent anyway. So if we were to kind of put those grant funds, that $750,000 back, the only money that we could really move to other projects, which some people have insinuated they'd prefer to see, would probably be about another $100,000 to $130,000, which is that other part. So we'd essentially be giving up $750,000 to be able to move something to another budget area. And we just didn't think that would be prudent financially. The village has benefited over the last, 5 or so years to the tune. We've been very good at, with the help of staff, putting enormous hours and man hours into getting these grants. To the tune that we've had almost 4 million in grants over the last 5 years. And this being a considerable portion of that, it would also look pretty bad for us to these agencies that put these grants out. We've gone ahead, we've awarded you. Now at the last minute, you're kind of backing out of them. So, to some extent, it could also, imperil any future funding that we might look for in grants. So that's the reason why council moved forward with that decision. We think it's the best financial decision because, for the investment of, less than $250,000 minus the improvements that have to be done anyway, we just couldn't stomach, given that $750,000 back. So that's what will fund the Village Hall Park Phase 1. And keep in mind, it's not a separate part of a parcel of property.
Yeah, it's not just developing.
It's
right
it's
here.
developing and kind of helping to assist the situation and creating some synergy with what's here on the Village Hall site already.
So my understanding though is that the objections that have been raised were like, why aren't we spending that money on the roundabout
Correct.
instead of the park? And the reason for that is that all of that grant money is for the park. So if we don't do the park,
It can't roll
It can't-
over.
you
we can't
can't
roll
move
it
it
over.
Yeah.
And once we eliminate that grant money, out of our $250,000 that we were putting in, that we could theoretically redirect, 150 of that is dedicated
We'd
to
have to
drainage
spend
here
on it
anyway.
anyway.
So if we took what was left, there's 100 plus that would go to the roundabout, and that's not enough to make it happen. I guess people were sort of looking at the two price tags for the roundabout and the park and saying, well, if you have that money, why not?
Right.
Yeah, and
So
I've
just to
had,
make everyone aware that that's been a discussion where people are saying, why can't you do both? So now if someone says that to you.
yeah, I've had the opportunity to have discussions directly with some of those concerned residents that were proposing that, both directly and in some of the coffee with councils. And I think once they're kind of better educated on how those funds can be used and how they're specific only to being used, even some of the folks that were most concerned about it at first were saying, well, yeah, no, we
makes
have a better
sense.
understanding now. You don't throw away the baby with the bathwater, you know?
Right.
And at least, we've been able to raise that awareness in some of those direct conversations in coffee with councils.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it helps to know those details. A lot of people don't want to hear the details, but those are really
Those are
important.
super important
Yeah.
details, which is why I.
Because I would
wanted
much
you
prefer to
bring
put
that
the
up.
roundabout in, living at a new one now. So I would much prefer to do that, but it's not possible.
Yeah,
I get
and
that.
that's why Jen asked me to kind of have
No,
this
I agree
conversation and
100%.
lay this out a little bit better because, people are saying, wait a minute, why, I thought we voted, a Village Hall Park down.
Right.
Well, no, they voted the GO bonds down and some of the things that would have brought, which, was a clear message for what they did. We still have to do from a day-to-day basis our due diligence as a council to make sure that we are, using the funds, not just that we collect from the taxpayers, but that we get through grants and things like that in the appropriate manners and in a financially responsible way. And this was the financially responsible way forward, in addition to, following through on some of the commitments that we made for improving the area here.
Mhm.
Then I know I'm relatively new, so this is helpful, but on what the phase one looks like, will that be something we'll be discussing here? Is that already mapped out, or is that going to be redefined because it's not GO bond funded, it's now funded through?
It is
grants?
something that we've discussed a number of times, as they were talking about the GO bonds before,
A different thing.
I was looking for the poster. There's a poster that shows
Yeah.
a concept design.
Okay, so I can get that.
But that's as far as it had ever really gotten
Yeah, but
to the
that's had the whole
PRG
thing
before
on, 'cause that has that
previously.
whole amphitheater. I
Yeah.
think to your point, what does phase one look like?
Those
I-
components were approved as part of our Part F grant application. So those components do have to
Gotcha.
go in for the project to be complete.
Okay,
I believe the timeline is by 26.
Yeah, part of it was the grading, retention ponds.
Event
um,
lawn, walking.
The event
loop.
lawn, the walking path kind of around the perimeter.
Mhm.
I think some additional
There
parking.
was some additional parking, I think.
I
added
don't
to-
remember the parking, but like the amphitheater would be a phase two. That would be a phase two,
Yeah.
a much later thing if we even go down that road. But phase one is really going to be the groundwork, the event lawn, which would be a flex space that we could use for multiple.
so I can get up to speed. I don't want to hold this up.
The
but
actual
this is-
design, the actual final design would be something to be discussed later through a
Gotcha.
formal bidding process, but those are the actual components that do have to go in.
It's a valid question
Mhm.
because we've never really talked about, I mean,
Okay,
I'm
hasn't
sure we
been-
talked about different phases, but I didn't have in my mind
We
what
didn't talk
phase
about it
one
at the
looked
phase
like.
level. We
Th-
were
there's-
presented
there's
with a conceptual
specifically-
design
Yeah.
and said, what do you think of this? Do you want an amphitheater? Do you not? How do you want to use it? Do you
So
want to
we'll
do
have that
farmer's market?
opportunity in future meetings then to.
Maybe.
Yeah, what we're
Yeah.
talking about is the specific things that were in the Part F grant application, because those are the things that we're committed to doing. And that didn't include the amphitheater or some of the other things
So
that were
those
in
might
the
not be,
GO
but
bonds.
something else. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so, moving on from there. Sorry, David, you just threw 2 hours of everything to get to gravel beds and Boy Scouts, but lay it on us, man.
That's quite all right. Thank you, Jen. Okay, so for the next agenda item, it is, I was tasked with going back from our last meeting and trying to put together a cost analysis or some kind of cost comparison for the discussion topics we've had about a tree nursery, and more specifically, a gravel bed tree nursery. From that, looking at it from my point of view, try to determine how many trees we're looking at projecting needing per year. that's kind of difficult to come up with.
Yeah.
But I did project anywhere from 10 to 30 trees a year. I used, over this past year, I think we purchased 15 or 16 for some screening purposes. So it's, I think some years you may need 0. Others you may need up to 30. It just depends on what projects come about and how much screening is in place. But it'd be difficult to see that we would need more than 30 at one time unless we come up with a broader use of all these
Program.
trees, yes.
Yeah.
And so after the information that Christina had provided previously with construction cost and based on that, I wanted to get a little better idea of what the overall process for staff purposes, how much time and effort would it take to operate this type of tree nursery? So I reached out to Union County Urban Forester Keith O'Haron, and I had a really good conversation with him. And we discussed this is a really this program is a really good program in the way it's set up. But as we talked through the process of the construction, the operation of it, what its purpose is what we came about, or what he shared with me, was this is an operation that is very time consuming, and it needs to be, staff need to spend a lot of time and effort making sure that you have the right product that you're growing, and the fertilization and the watering and all of that. But it could generate up to 100 or more trees per year.
Yeah.
And so it's a very large process, but it is an operation, if you will, of itself, just managing one of these type of nurseries. And so, but it does provide, like I said, those trees, and it's a quick growth, high output type of liner stock program. But in saying that, it will require educating staff and volunteers on its operation, how to grow the trees and take care of them. The fertilizing, you have to, spray for insects, and you'll keep it safe from any, whether it's outdoor predators like deer or even internal, human beings taking some, if you don't keep them under lock and key. So with the estimated cost of construction, I estimate it to be anywhere from $8,000 to $10,000. That includes getting irrigation to it. We have irrigation in the area, but we would still have to get some underground water lines to it. Taking that in consideration with the amount of staff time that we think is going to be needed, which would be very extensive, Keith and I discussed, he said, really in his opinion, the recommended option that we really should look at is an annual budgeted amount and purchase trees as needed. He said we could save money over the long haul, and that, that seems to be the best method or best option to go with now. But he did offer up another one. I think, Christina, we had discussions, or I don't remember if it was in these meetings or you and I had it off site. But there are other options. You can grow the trees in fabric grow bags. And I think there's a program going on. He's actually taken upon
At school.
at the school. And so that's, if we wanted to look at going in that direction, that may be a little more manageable.
Especially if you're only talking 10 to 30 trees.
It's
as
definitely
opposed to like
cheaper,
50.
but it still requires all the other, like keeping the deer off of them and the kids up, well, not kids, the people off of them and all that. And kind of constantly checking them because they're in pots.
Well, they could blow it.
Yeah, and I think, my thought when I first, when I was on PR&G board and kind of brought this up, is my thinking was, gosh, purchasing these trees is getting very expensive because, it's not inexpensive to purchase these trees, especially if you're looking to get anything, So my initial thought on all of this was to utilize some of the green space and open space that we have in the park and things in hopes to save money. If we're having to dedicate so much staff to it, you know, maybe you look at whether there's a volunteer group that might come into play or something like that, where there wouldn't be that cost. But overall, you know, my thought in even bringing this, you know, as a project was to hope to save money. So I think if what Keith is kind of saying is that, yeah, there's a lot of unknown hidden costs in the manpower that it takes to run this. You know, you know, maybe we do look more at, you know, what our tree needs are going to be and making that some sort of a budget item.
And also look for sources.
Yeah.
And
If
I
we
sent
could
you
partner with
a,
some sources.
I sent you I think they will sell to us, and Bob and I have had run-ins with their trees and they're great. So, we have planted some of them.
Okay.
So if you look at about 20 trees a year, and just taking the difference between the 10 and the 30, you know, even if we pay $25 per tree, that's a $500 expense. So if, you know, if we look to budget $500 a year toward a tree program, some years we're going to come in under that. And then, you know, we may use all the way up to that 500. But again, that $25, I'm throwing that number out there. Depending on the type of tree that you purchase, that could range as well. So we may get
Well,
more trees.
certainly the size, because $25 is going to be a pretty small tree.
I was
It's
gonna
going
say
to be a.
$25 would be that liner stock. It'd be
3
more
or
like
5 gallon.
$250 for
Well, yeah, you
a
can,
significant
you
size
can
tree.
get bare root cheap, really cheap.
Yes,
but-
bare root is really
but-
cheap.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, just wanted to note, we are running a little over right now. We did have another meeting scheduled for 11 that we do need to get started very soon.
Yep.
So just want to encourage the board to
Okay.
be a little expedient.
I mean,
That's
but
all.
$500 does not seem like an exorbitant budget item. Right?
Ah.
Just,
Okay.
and beats becoming a nursery.
Right.
Okay, so thank you for those cost considerations. We will let that percolate in the backs of our heads, but it sounds like right now, the whole goal was to save money. Doesn't sound like we're gonna be saving anything, so unless anybody comes up with an idea for a different tactic other than just setting aside money, and we can look at a future date at what kind of financial set aside would be useful for that. So moving on to new business, Davey, you have a potential Eagle Scout project.
I do, and I'm excited to bring this before you. Bob actually put me in touch with Boy Scout. His name is Frank Brockman, and he is looking for a project that could earn him an Eagle Scout award. And I don't know if I added it to the agenda. I'm not sure if you can see that. But he provided a PowerPoint presentation, but the presentation itself, basically what he's looking to do is, pull this up. His purpose is to, first to gain approval from the council for the Village of Marvin, that this would be a good project for him to undertake. If council's gives him approval at tonight's meeting, he would then have to take this plan and go back to Boy Scouts of America through their Eagle Scout program and gain approval from them as well. And then if they give approval, then he would come back, and that's when we would start planning on the timing and all that of the project. But his idea and thought is to add trailhead markers in the Marvin Eford Park walking trail. And in doing that, I think he's proposed 6 markers. Signs would be about 12 by 18 inches. And it'll be aluminum metals with decorative posts. The post will be permanently installed in concrete. And it tells you the quarter mile, half mile, 3/4 mile. So if you are, in my opinion, it's a really good project, because if you're walking on that trail and you have some kind of issue, that whether it's a medical issue or you fall or trip, if you're near one of these, you can at least report where you are in the park, And so not only does it help you keep up with how much you're walking for
I was
anyone
thinking
that
that
is
first, but
or-
medical emergency is where you went.
medical emergencies are another positive for this as well. So in short, he is requesting that he be given approval from council tonight, but he wanted to bring it to you first, make you aware of what he was doing. He's in school today, so I offered to give you the information in his absence, but he will be at tonight's meeting and presenting to council this entire project, but just wanted to bring this before you and get any thoughts or ideas you
I
may
think it
have on
sounds great. I never do know
Where you're
how
at.
many times I've gone, how many
Yeah,
miles.
yeah, I looked at the picture, it looks great the way, and I guess that's his proposed design. I had one thought on that is, and you're, I know that the loop is just a loop in Eford, but would it be possible to put like a trail, usually you have a trail map too, so you know if it's an out and back versus, is that something we could ask him to consider so that when you approach the trail, you know that it's
The approximate shape of it.
right,
or
the shape of it,
yeah.
because it's not that it's that hard, but it,
Like a Mario Kart. track.
right.
Well, there's also the little cutoffs. that-
Right, so you know which way you're going. I just feel like maybe that gives you a sense of I'm on a trail that.
So are you saying just like a piece of paper that shows the map and then where his,
Like, or a permanent
where
board
his
when
signs
I
are.
mean, It's not a complicated trail, but normally at a trailhead, it has a map as well as the names,
And if the
maybe.
signs are already designed to be aluminum, I can see aluminum sign with a
Something that just
decorative.
kind
Yeah,
of
he-
showed the circle and
he
if there's
showed these here
yeah,
just to see.
yes, like that, but
Yep.
with just a map, just to
I'll,
consider.
No, they
I'll
do
bring
look
that
great.
up.
Yeah, thank you.
I think that's a good idea.
Okay, I think, yeah, no, I think they look fantastic. I think everybody here's in favor.
I-
So,
I think, I hope that, he'll give a good presentation. I'd give him an opportunity to speak in public and,
yeah,
and bring this
sure
in
he's
a
looking
formal
forward to that.
presentation. So we're looking forward to it.
absolutely. That's awesome. Well, thank you for bringing that to us. I think.
It's a great idea.
I think it is a great idea. So I hope he gets all the approvals that he needs on that.
So are they looking for a recommendation to council for tonight?
Yeah, sir. He's
This
just,
is,
he's,
this is not something the board formally has to vote on.
Okay.
Okay.
So
We
we can
like
just,
it.
in the record, we can just.
Yep, it's noted in the record. You guys didn't have any objections.
Beautiful. We do not have any objections. All right. Do we have any action items?
I defer back.
What?
I yield back. There's none.
Okay, cool. Review of ongoing action item list. We don't have anything there.
I don't think anything needs to be updated. I can double check though. We just had the tree nursery stuff, so
I think we've closed that down for now.
Yeah.
So,
Just put dollar signs, like 20 of them and say no.
your list is now empty.
Alright.
If you check those off.
That
well,
sounds
then it
wrong.
was worth it for like 2.5 hours. All right,
That
so,
sounds wrong.
do I hear a motion to adjourn
So
this
moved.
Board member
incredibly long?
comments.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, do we have any board? I feel like we've talked for so long. Thank you, John, for keeping me on track, though. Do we have any board member comments before we close up?
No.
Nope. Okay, great. So do I hear a motion to adjourn this PR&G meeting?
Seconded.
All right, so we will adjourn at 11:19 on Tuesday, April 9th. Everybody, all in favor?
Hi.
Beautiful. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Agree.
Marvin Day meeting in the conference
I
room.
feel bad that we took so long.
No, but I would tell you at least. We needed to talk about all of those things.
I feel like all of that needed to get out. They're gonna all be pissed, but I'm not also.
They are going to be pissed, but.
Well, this could be recommended. So, yeah. Well, and I was, the point I was trying to make was we don't have to do anything. But if we hold it, there's the option. Exactly. And it's a competitive thing. It is like, if we're trying to get from point A to point B, you have to have that one. Thank you guys. Thanks, Christina. Sorry about the.